Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about breastfeeding.
Okay.
And I'm really excited about this one because I feel like we're going to learn something.
Mm,
Um, we're going to be looking at a really interesting research article from Pediatrics Journal. And, as always, we're going to kind of go beyond just the average advice that you might hear out there.
yeah.
I really want to get into the details here. So we're going to be talking about like how much milk babies actually drink, how often they feed, and, even looking at things like the fat content of the milk
Right.
and how that can change throughout the day.
hmm It's such a fascinating topic, and I think sometimes we get so bogged down in thinking there has to be this one right way to do things, when in reality
Yeah.
there's a huge amount of variation
Yeah,
in what's normal.
exactly. And I think this research really drives that point home. So they studied a whole bunch of moms, all exclusively breastfeeding their
Uh-huh.
babies between 1 and 6 months old. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was just how much variation there is in how babies feed. Like,
Yeah.
you have some babies who are those little snackers, they're feeding all the time, but just taking small amounts. And then you have other babies who are like, they have their 3 square meals, kind of like clockwork.
Exactly. And I think that's so reassuring for parents to hear
Yeah.
because it's easy to get caught up in those comparisons and anxieties like, is my baby feeding enough? Are they feeding too often? But this research really shows that both patterns can be perfectly healthy and normal.
Totally. And that brings up another question that I know I used to stress over.
Mm,
Do you have to offer both breasts at every feed?
right. I hear that a lot from moms. And what's interesting is this study found that about half the time, babies were actually satisfied for at least an hour after feeding from just one breast.
Oh, really? See, I always felt like I had to offer both sides because that's what I had read in
Yeah,
the
sure.
books.
Right.
But now I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I was making it harder on myself.
Yeah. And there's a good reason for that. Most women actually have one breast that's a bit more productive than the other.
Oh, so it's not just in my head. Like, I actually do feel a little lopsided sometimes.
It's totally normal. It's not about favoring one side or doing anything wrong. It's
Hmm.
just part of our individual variation.
Makes sense. So while we're talking about individual differences, what about the whole thing with how much milk a breast can actually hold? I remember reading that can vary a lot too.
Yeah. You're thinking about breast storage capacity, and you're right. It
Yeah.
can be dramatically different from person to person.
Right.
The average in this study was about 179 grams, but the range they saw was incredible. Some women could only hold 74 grams,
Wow.
while others were up to 382 grams.
That's crazy. So how does that actually play out? Like, if you have a smaller storage capacity, does that mean your baby's going to want to feed more often?
Exactly. And it doesn't mean you're not producing enough milk. It's simply about your individual anatomy.
So all those times I felt like I was constantly feeding, maybe it was just because my storage capacity was on the smaller side.
It's very possible.
Got it. And I guess that makes sense when you think about it, right? Our bodies are all different.
Absolutely. And this research really highlights the need to move away from those rigid comparisons and instead focus on what's working for you and your baby.
Yeah. It's so freeing to think that way. And this brings up another interesting point, the whole fat content of breast milk.
Okay.
I know fat is super important for babies,
Yeah.
but I never thought about how it might change throughout the day.
Right. We often think about how much milk a baby is getting,
Hmm.
but the when is actually really important too.
Really? Tell me more about that.
So, as the breast empties, the fat content actually goes up. It's like your baby gets this richer, more calorie-dense milk towards the end of a feed.
Wow. So even if a baby is feeding more frequently, they're still getting those good fats?
Exactly. It's like this incredible built-in system to ensure that babies get the nutrients they need no matter their feeding style.
That's amazing. Okay, so now I have to ask about the dreaded night feeds.
All right.
Every parent I know is exhausted from those late night wake-up calls.
Mm.
Did this study shed any light on whether those night feeds are really necessary?
So this was interesting. They actually found no difference in total milk production between moms whose babies fed at night and those who didn't.
Wait, seriously?
Hmm.
So even if my baby wakes up 5 times a night, it doesn't actually affect my milk supply in the long run?
That's what this research suggests. It could be that babies are just naturally sleepier at night.
Okay.
Maybe they produce more melatonin or something. Or it could be that those night feeds are more about comfort and bonding
Hmm.
than about boosting your milk production.
So those night feeds might not be about quantity, but about meeting my baby's specific needs at that moment.
Exactly. And Again, it comes back to individual needs and preferences.
Yeah,
Some babies might need those night feeds to feel truly full or settled,
right.
while others might naturally sleep longer stretches.
Wow, this is all so eye-opening. I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulder.
I know. It's so liberating to realize that there's no one right way to breastfeed
Hmm.
and that these variations are completely normal.
It's all about finding what works for you and your baby.
Exactly. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, there's more?
There's so much more to unpack about these individual variations in breastfeeding, so stay tuned.
Okay, I can't wait. This is fascinating. All right, so before we move on, I
Yeah.
have to ask about something that's always kind of puzzled me. The study mentioned something about intrinsic factors
Okay.
related to milk production.
Right.
What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Intrinsic factors basically refer to like inherent differences within
Oh.
each breast that can influence how much milk they make.
So it's not just about like how often a baby nurses on each side
Right.
or how effectively they're draining the breast.
Exactly.
There are actually like physical differences between the breasts themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Like this study found a pretty noticeable difference in milk production between the left and right breasts,
Really?
with the right breast actually producing more in most cases.
So all those times I was like obsessing over making sure my baby nursed equally on both sides. Maybe it didn't even matter that much.
Yeah, it just shows how our bodies are just, doing their own thing.
Yeah.
There's so much happening that we don't even realize.
Yeah.
And I think it just reinforces that we don't have to like micromanage every single aspect of
Yeah.
breastfeeding.
Totally. It's so freeing to just like let go of some of those rules
Right.
and embrace the natural process, you know?
Absolutely.
Okay, speaking of natural processes,
Yeah.
I remember this study also talked about seasonal variations.
Okay.
Did they find any connection between like the time of year
Okay.
and how much milk moms produce?
That's interesting. They didn't find any significant relationship there.
So whether it's the middle of summer or the dead of winter,
Right.
bodies just keep on making milk.
Pretty much. Yeah. It's pretty amazing how adaptable our bodies are.
All right, so before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I have one last thought. You know, this study looked at babies between 1 and 6 months old.
Mm-hmm.
What happens as they get older
Okay.
and start solids? Does that variability in feeding patterns, like, does that continue?
That is a great question. And to be honest,
Yeah.
it's something we need to explore further. How does breastfeeding change
Yeah.
and adapt to those evolving needs as babies grow?
So much to think about. Well, this deep dive has been amazing. It's so reassuring to know that all these variations are normal.
Yeah,
It really takes the pressure off, wouldn't you say?
absolutely. It's all about shifting our focus from like rigid rules to individual needs and preferences
Yeah.
and empowering parents to trust their instincts in their babies.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the world of breastfeeding. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about everything from like, busting those myths about the average baby
Okay.
to like, really digging into how much variation there is
Yeah.
and, everything from breast storage capacity to fat content.
It's been pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, what's really stood out is just how important it is
Yeah.
to trust our bodies and trust our babies.
I totally agree. It's like, once we let go of those expectations and we
Yeah.
start to like, embrace those variations, it's like this whole new world opens up.
Totally, it
Yeah.
does. And it makes me think, we've talked a lot about the science of breastfeeding,
Right.
the facts and the figures.
Yeah.
But beyond all that, there's just something so beautiful about that connection
Yeah.
between a mother and her baby.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
It really is like a special bond that,
Yeah,
goes beyond words,
it does. And it's like, even though knowledge is important,
Mm-hmm.
it's also about trusting those instincts. Those little whispers that guide us along the way.
Yeah, those gut feelings are so
Yeah.
powerful. Well, to our listener, as you navigate your own breastfeeding journey,
Yeah.
just remember to embrace the science, but also trust your instincts.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, cherish those moments of connection
Yeah.
with your baby.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone in this. There's a whole community of support out there for you.
Beautifully said. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring the world
Mhm.
with curiosity and an open mind.
Happy feeding, everyone.